Well, hello, Econ 374, Intermediate Microeconomics. Hey, you may have noticed Chapter 1 was kind of a cakewalk, but don't worry, I promise to do better. Right, this is going to get interesting. So, Chapter 2, Supply and Demand. It sounds pretty easy, unless you still have nightmares from principles, then maybe not, but it's definitely going to be pretty reviewy. So, here's what I'm going to do for this mini lecture. I'm going to briefly remind you why we care about supply and demand. And then I'm going to tell you the assumptions behind the model and when they're appropriate, but also some cases where they're not. And then I'm going to tell you why we use math. Okay? This video will not do any of the technical work at all. Right? There's more videos in this week's playlist that do the technical work. I'm not being redundant. You can do them then. Side note, if you get questions in this chapter, a lot of you will. It's your first time getting mathy with your economics. Please ask those questions in the discussion forums on Brightspace. I've taught online classes before where I get the same question in 5 different emails or more. And I don't want to do that. I'd rather we have an ongoing discussion where everyone can benefit, not just the students who have enough initiative to hunt me down. Plus, it saves my time. I don't like to write the same thing 5 times. Because, yeah, that's a thing. All right. So, supply and demand. Let me give a couple of examples really quick. Some of the things that I thought were interesting. Here's one that I saw in the news. Actually, before I share my screen, this might start to feel a little controversial, but I'm not trying to weigh in on the controversy. Okay, I want to talk briefly about something related to the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Okay, for those who totally had their heads dug in the sand this summer, the Supreme Court ruled saying that states can now choose their own abortion laws with no federal requirements. And this was at least a short-term win for pro-lifers and at least a short-term loss for pro-choicers. Okay? So, wherever you stand on that, I'm either happy for you or I'm sorry for you, but I'm not weighing in on it. That's not what this class is for. Now, what it does mean is that in a lot of states, they're going to have more restrictive abortion policies, making it harder to get them, which means, all other things equal, I would expect to see more babies getting born, right? And I don't know if you've ever seen a baby. They're really cute, but they're expensive. It costs a lot of money to have them, and then you gotta feed them, you gotta get a bigger place to live, and then they start wrecking your career and making it harder to work. I love them. I have 4, almost 5 of them. I'm not saying it's a bad deal, but I'm saying it's a very costly deal, and it's not something you want to just accidentally do. So, again, without weighing in on abortion, that's not my goal here. Let's say you're in a state where abortion just got hard to get. That means that people who aren't interested in having babies just got a more dangerous lifestyle setup, right? It's harder for them to protect their current lifestyle. So, here we go. We just raised the cost of the normal status quo, and so people are going to change. So I'm going to show you, by the way, this picture behind me. I have no idea what tools they actually use. I just did an operating room thing. Anyway, some headlines I saw. More Iowans seek vasectomies after court rulings threaten blah, blah, blah. Doctors speak out about high demand for vasectomies. Dudes are waking up and scrambling for vasectomies post-Roe. Houston urologists seeing tremendous uptick in vasectomies. Roe v. Wade overturned. Dr. C. growing to blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. So what's going on here? I kind of thought it was kind of funny. It was very like, when I saw the headlines, I was like, oh yeah, of course. But people are thinking like economists, regardless of their politics. There's a lot of dudes out there. That's what the headline called them. There's a lot of dudes out there who are like, whoa, dude, I don't want to accidentally make someone have a baby and then have to pay child support for the rest of my life. Because that's a big thing. So if you're just, ooh, I was about to do a bad pun. Never mind. No bad puns. So if you're just messing around, yeah, all of a sudden, vasectomy is looking a lot better than it used to. Because one of the common like fallbacks that people have is now harder to reach. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. Another supply and demand one, which is much less political, but I still think it's interesting, is, I guess it is kind of political. Gasoline, gas prices. All right, let's think about it for just a minute. So gas prices were already rising going into this summer. Like early this year, they were already rising. Couple of reasons. One, more and more people are going back to work, so they're driving more. Two, travel was increasing, and people were getting more and more like summer plans. It's like, it was just happening, right? Supply and demand. There's a lot more demand for the gas. There's also some supply constraints. You see, the government has lots and lots of permits out for oil companies to create new drilling platforms and whatever, or to get new wells, but the oil companies aren't doing them. Now, there could be a couple of reasons for this. I'm not going to attribute a specific one. One of them that I've seen on my Facebook quite a bit is that the oil companies are trying to create a shortage so they can charge a high amount of money. There's probably some truth in that. I don't think that's the only story, but there's probably some truth in that. That's what firms do when they get market power. Remember Monopoly from principles class? You lower the quantity so you can raise the price. It's probably a thing. So that's one reason gas prices are rising. Another reason that gas companies weren't selling enough as demand was rising is they might be worried about the future. Right? President Biden, up until the last couple months, sounded very environmentally conscious. Right? He was all about green energy and his Build Back Better plan and all these changes. He's tough on fossil fuels, like blah, blah, blah. So why would a company spend a whole bunch of money building new refineries and stuff that won't even be operational for several more years if they think in the future they're just going to be regulated into oblivion? There's not much incentive there. So firms aren't selling enough gas to meet the standard demand, so prices started rising. Now, it wasn't as drastic, but then war in Russia and Ukraine. I guess it was war in Ukraine, but you know what I mean. That happened. And Russia's a big player on the global oil market. Oil is a global commodity. By the way, whether or not you like the current president, whether or not you like the old president, oil is a globally traded good, and the president only has so much control over it. Anyway, yeah. So our oil prices were already going up, and then globally, one of the world's biggest exporters can't export as much. They're busy, and a lot of people are shutting them out and being like, screw you, Russia, we don't like what you're doing, so we're not going to buy your crap, and all kinds of stuff like that. And so that exacerbated the shortage and caused prices to go up even further and further. Yeah, we had people wanting to travel for the summer. We had firms not selling as much for whatever reason. We have war overseas. That's a great recipe for supply and demand to explain that the price is going to go up a lot. And then what happens to us? I had friends, including myself, my own friend. I had friends, and I also started being more conscious about gas. Right, we got 2 cars, and I started being more intentional about driving the more fuel efficient one. I started trying to do fewer car trips, stuff like that. Right, we find ways to save some money. Also, there's been really good demand for electric vehicles and more fuel efficient vehicles. People find ways to transition away from needing an expensive good. Now, we can dig into all that if we want to. I could go and go talking about gasoline. I'm not going to. I could also go talking about vasectomies. I'm not going to. I could do gas for longer, though. I know more about buying gas. Anyway, but this is just a mini lecture. I just wanted to give you some ideas of some recent news and how supply and demand can help enhance your understanding of it. Now, we are going to move on, though. So, supply and demand can explain a lot of things. And businesses also want to know it, right? The company I'm working for, they have me dealing with a pricing model. I am looking at the price of a bunch of agricultural products down in South America and trying to predict consumer behavior and how much sales there will be at different prices, and calculate some elasticities and stuff like that. Like, this huge multinational corporation is actually really interested in that. Enough that they've hired me and like an army of other data scientists and economists to do it for them. Estimating demand and elasticity. Like, they want to know that stuff because it helps them to run their business and to make good choices. So, yeah, it can help us just to understand the world. But also for businesses, it can help them to know what to do. It can help them to understand what's coming for them and what they can do about it. So let's say I'm a surgeon who does the vasectomies. Let's go back to that topic for a minute. And I hear this news that the laws are changing in my area. And I realize that people are probably going to be more interested in my service than they used to be. Maybe not all people, but some. I might be interested in a few things. 1, I could probably raise my price and keep a lot of business. 2, I should probably gear up and be ready to be busy or backlogged. 3, I might even consider marketing. Maybe I can find a certain target demographic and send ads to them. Let's see. So, generally speaking, probably younger people. Probably, I don't know. I'm sure there's some way I could figure out how to put ads out on Instagram or whatever. I'm not going to dig into the content of those ads, but I might be thinking supply and demand thoughts to help me figure out who should I be targeting, because this group over here is now willing to pay more for this than they used to. And as a business owner, I might be interested in tapping into that demand. These decisions happen everywhere. They happen in sandwiches, they happen in cars, they happen in accounting services, they happen at MMA tickets. Okay? People who are going to run successful businesses have to be aware of what's going on in their market and how the consumers are going to respond to changes. Now, let's see, assumptions in this model. 1, the standard supply and demand model assumes that there are lots of consumers and that none of them can control the price. None of them can push it down. It assumes there's lots of sellers and that none of them can arbitrarily push the price up. So some of the examples I gave about like the surgeon raising his price, I guess it doesn't quite fit supply and demand, but that's okay. It assumes there's perfect information, that sellers and buyers know the same things about the good. It assumes that there is free entry and exit in a market. If I want to sell it, I can. If I don't, I won't. Being a surgeon is a great example of when there's not free entry. There's like a bachelor's degree and med school and more training before you can enter that market. That's a lot in your way. Anyway, so lots of people, lots of buyers, lots of sellers, free entry and exit, perfect info. Oh yeah, and everyone sells the exact same thing. Okay, those are the requirements for supply and demand to be the perfect model. And for most things, you're not going to get all those. See, supply and demand measure something called perfect competition, and that's a very rare situation. And so I want to tell you something that I tell all my students, which is this. All models are wrong, but some are useful. You see, supply and demand will very rarely perfectly match the real world. Almost never, actually. And yet, I can use it to explain almost anything in the real world. Not everything, not perfectly, but it can add to my thoughts in almost anything. Even my kids, poor kids, they have an economist for a father. They're starting to learn supply and demand. We were just talking about like people getting jobs and working and how I couldn't find anyone to like dig my electrical trench in the backyard. And my 10-year-old chimes in and starts talking about supply and demand. I was like, booyah, Econ dad win right there. What up? Anyway, it's everywhere. So even if you don't have all the exact right assumptions, it's a pretty cool framework that helps explain a lot of things. Now, last thought. Most things in this chapter are review, at least on a conceptual level, until one big thing. Math. Right? There's not a lot of new information about supply and demand here. What's new is, instead of just giving you well-labeled graphs, I give you equations, which then you can use to make your own graphs and do your own thinking. Now, why do I use equations? What's the point? The point is simple. Learning how to quantify the model makes the model better, if you can do it properly. You see, which is more interesting? To say, if you raise the prices, the quantity goes down. Or to say, if you raise the price by 5%, the quantity will fall by 6%. You see, that's way more interesting. If you can give a more concrete prediction, that's more useful. And so we call this intermediate microeconomics. Why is it intermediate? It's the middle step between just learning about this stuff and being able to think about it versus being able to use it. Because what would be next after this class, if you were going to apply it, you would take some sort of advanced micro class or some applied micro class where you learn how to add data to the models and then to do some estimating and to actually figure out what they are in real life. Because there's no company that hires economists to make up numbers and draw graphs. They hire economists to do some crazy data work and estimating. But this is the step between, hey, I'm thinking about it, and hey, I can use this. So for intermediate micro, that's what we do. Yeah, that is it. It's a little longer than I thought, but hey, better than 2.5 hours of lectures, right? So don't forget, there's videos covering the math and how the models work. You can also go to the principles page in the course schedule. They have playlists also. Most of my videos for this class only cover the math, not a lot of the intuition. If you need the intuition, you can actually go back to the principles page and get a lot of it. So yeah, don't forget, ask questions in the forums, and yeah, let me know if you need help, guys. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be hard. I would strongly suggest you get started sooner than later, right? It's going to be hard unless you're really good at math. Don't be afraid of the math, though. Once you learn a couple of tricks, this stuff gets really repetitive. Okay, it's the same thing over and over. In fact, if you can learn how to solve it with letters instead of numbers, you might just find a way to have a permanent solution that always works no matter what numbers I give you. What do I mean by that? I want to show you guys something that's kind of like my little nerdy pride and joy. I use this for generating in-class examples when I actually have lectures. But all this stuff, there's actually solutions that are kind of nifty. Like I built this thing that says quantity is A minus B times P, and I can plug in values for A and B. And then for the supply curve, CP minus D, and values for those. And based on that information, it automatically tells me what the price is, what the quantity is, how much consumer and producer surplus there is, what the price elasticities are in equilibrium. I can add taxes to the model, price ceilings, price floors, trade. Oh, we're not going to do trade. That's okay. Externalities, chapter 17 kind of stuff, right? All of this stuff is automated. If I change that number, boom, everything else changes. Now, why do I show you that? Not because I'm going to share with you. I'm totally not. But just to say the math is very repetitive. Pretty much any setup I can give you in the whole class was on that page right now. It's all there. And so if you learn how to use it, yeah, everything from there is pretty straightforward. So pay attention to it. Make sure you understand it. We have 3 chapters in the supply and demand framework. Chapters 2, and then 3, and then 17 before we move on. So make sure you get it now, please. It'll help you a lot. I don't want you to get to chapter 17 and be like, I've been lost for 3 weeks. It's like, well, yeah, you never learned the basic part. Learn it now. Trust me. All right, guys, I've rambled long enough. Thanks for watching. Sorry about the gross surgical thoughts. What was kind of interesting? I don't know. Supply and demand, yo. Peace out.